Good morning. Now I am audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible, sir.
Very good. I think we have now 4 more minutes to go.
Yes, sir. 2-3 minutes will start, sir. Once
Yeah.
30-40 people come, we'll start.
Oh, fine.
Okay, sir. Sir, we'll start, sir.
Oh, sure. So, very good morning to you all. So, today we'll have a very basic science session, which will be very interesting, and I consider this very practically useful for you because we are going into preventive cardiology today. So, the most controversial topic as of today, did I share the screen? No, I think, listen, I have not shared the screen. Let me share the screen. Okay, here it is, share the screen. Okay, share the screen. I have to take the PowerPoint. Yeah. Today I am taking you to the basic science studies on basics of cholesterol controversy, which is one of the most raging controversies which you would have all experienced over the last maybe a decade of your medical schooling, isn't it? So let us go on to it. So the outline, I am going to first define what is this controversy. And then secondly, I will introduce you a medical student. Her name is Helen Hobbs. Do you know, any of you know Helen Hobbs? Nikhil? Is anybody rising there? No. Okay, well, she is the one who's one of the persons involved in in identifying the PCSK9 antibodies which we are using now. And then the basic science in 1985, that year she read the Nobel Prize winning article. So that was which changed her career. And who got Nobel Prize for medicine this year? Nobel Prize in physiology this year?
No idea, sir. Anyone?
Anyone, because it is extremely important, because something related to cardiology got the Nobel Prize, isn't it?
Okay, sir.
It actually on hypoxia inducible factor, because we all fight a lot with cyanotic congenital heart diseases. This for those people who made out the hypoxia inducible factor. And she actually has made that Nobel dream, when the Nobel Prize winning scientist in 1985 brought out a concept, that dream was fulfilled by her studies. And essentially, finally, I would like, because all of us use the word junk food. But what is a junk food we need to define, isn't it? So these are my outline of my discussion today. Anybody know what was the Nobel Prize winning discovery in 1985? Can you name the connected Nobel laureate? It was in relation to cholesterol.
LDL receptors were identified. So
Very good, very good. Who are the people?
Goldstein and Brown.
Brown, fantastic, a very wonderful pair in science. So when I joined DM Cardiology, I had no controversy. So when I joined DM Cardiology, there was no controversy. I had a Bible at hand. It was a circulation article which clearly stated the cholesterol controversy over. It was summarized by a gentleman called Daniel Steinberg, who is the authority behind the oxidized cholesterol hypothesis of atherosclerosis, and he chaired all those NCEP, ATP guidelines 1, 2, 3 and all. And he categorically recommended that dietary cholesterol for an adult should not exceed more than 200 milligrams. So whenever I met a patient, I used to discourage from taking milk, cholesterol-rich foods like egg, meat and all. So that was very, very clear until 25 or 30 years down the line. The US dietary recommendation decided to remove high cholesterol food from the naughty list. So there they said that, when you eat cholesterol, it goes into the body and inhibits the HMG coenzyme enzyme, the rate limiting step in the body. So the body reduces its cholesterol synthesis and the blood level does not change. So you don't have to worry about cholesterol was the basic recommendation from that article. But still then there were, recently also there are articles coming in New England Journal saying that if you take 300 milligram of dietary cholesterol, your cardiovascular chances of dying due to cardiovascular disease increases by 18%. And then every egg, half an egg eaten increases the risk by 6% and all. So there is a real controversy. I am not sure what to talk to my patients. So I went back to the original paper. It was actually, if you look at that, the original paper by which the feedback recommended, inhibition recommended is the original paper by Sean Hemer in 1933. And mind you, that was the first time a biochemist identifies feedback inhibition. The first substance which has categorically shown that there is a feedback inhibition in its synthesis possible was cholesterol. So you can imagine how important it is. So when you go into the dietary guidelines recommendation, it clearly states only one statement, that dietary cholesterol is no longer a nutrient of concern. That is all what they said. But then people made a lot of stories out there to the extent saying that the cholesterol scam was the greatest scam of the century. But in the same year, this is the Dietary Association, the Federal Drug Administration categorically cleared the PCSK9 antibodies for treating hyperlipidemia. So this was for all the people who are practicing cardiology, it was a very paradoxical issue. There is some time one side there is you eat cholesterol, there is paradoxical inhibition. Other side they say you bring down the cholesterol lower and lower. And any of you still think certain whether cholesterol is the real reason for atherosclerosis, should really read this article in 2000 by W.C. William C. Roberts, who is the editor of the journal, American Journal of Cardiology, who categorically analyzes the various doubts which comes to our mind on atherosclerosis and proves that even though you know about 100 or 200 risk factors for atherosclerosis, the one unavoidable risk factor is the blood cholesterol level or the blood LDL level. So that's an article which all of you should go through. So essentially, the mechanism of inhibition of cholesterol synthesis in your body when you eat cholesterol involves two proteins. One is the apolipoprotein, which is responsible for transferring the cholesterol from intestine to the liver, and there is a receptor for receiving it, an LDL receptor. So this was the Nobel Prize winning article. They showed that dietary cholesterol inhibits the rate limiting enzyme in 1985 by involving two important proteins, a transport protein and a receptor protein. So that was a path-breaking discovery at that time. Why it is also, I will explain, because cholesterol is a substance which is not soluble in water. It just cannot be transported in blood like that. That's why it needs a transport protein as well as a receptor. And they clearly enunciated that the dietary cholesterol was able to inhibit because of these two proteins involved in it. So this girl who just passed out of MBBS read that paper. Every Nobel lecture is put on the net. You can go and see that. So she read that article and wrote to them saying that, you have beautifully enumerated the methods. You have said there are two proteins are responsible for it. But then this explains only 2/3 of the patients with familial dyslipidemia. 1/3 of the patients still have a hypercholesterol blood cholesterol level without abnormalities of these two proteins. I would like to work on that. They said, okay, come over, we will work on that. She went there and became a part of the Dallas study and recognized that there is another protein involved in this apolipoprotein LDL receptor mechanism. That is how the PCSK9 antibodies are born. So in the same year, I also passed out of medical school, but I was fascinated by the advances in the coronary interventions. And in 1989, I was writing to Antonio Colombo, who actually came out with the concept of high pressure dilatation, asking for a fellowship at the Oxner Clinic at New York. So that shows, how reading a basic science paper makes your life different. So now any of you can answer what is PCS, what is the full form of PCSK9?
Proprotein convertase subtilisin kexin 9.
Okay, why? What is this? Why this protein is such a complex name? What do you mean by proprotein? So your answer is absolutely right. It's a proprotein convertase subtilisin kexin 9. What is this? Proprotein is an extremely important concept in biochemistry, where you take this pepsin, chymotrypsin, everything. These are all synthesized as proproteins. The cells those synthesize this protein, if this enzyme is active, that cell will die. So all these hormones as well as enzymes are, if you take insulin, it is synthesized as proinsulin. Only after coming out, it will become a insulin by a cleavage of the C-peptide. So every enzyme is producing proprotein. So this proprotein to become active needs a convertase, isn't it? So here is a proprotein convertase. So what is the subtilisin mean is very simple. There's a bacillus called Bacillus subtilis. This bacillus has this protein as in the form of subtilisin. And kexin is a fungal protein. And this kexin is also exactly same as this proprotein convertase. So this essentially shows that how beautifully this enzyme is conserved throughout evolution. And there are 9 such enzymes. That's why it is called a proprotein convertase subtilisin kexin. Once you know it, how happy you are. There is a heavily conserved protein in nature. So there is a beautiful review article, proprotein convertases in health and disease. Have any of you seen this article? So you should go and read this article in New England Journal of Medicine, and this stresses the importance of understanding basics. So whenever you get a word like this, just go into it. Like the BCL, ABR in leukemia. Whenever there is a word that comes, it's peculiar. It is extremely important for us to understand what this basis means, and this stresses the importance. Go and read the article, proprotein convertases in health and disease, and this proprotein convertase got converted to an escort protein for this LDL receptors. That is the importance. If you look at the evolution of various cholesterol lowering drugs, in fact, the earliest drug was L-thyroxine. People recognize that people with hyperthyroidism has got a low cholesterol level, so they started with L-thyroxine. Then came the discovery of niacin before 1970. Then came the cholestyramine, then the clofeprate, then the simvastatin, fenofibrate, gemfibrozil, atorvastatin, lovastatin, ezetimibe to the proprotein convertase enzyme inhibitors as of today. So can you tell me which is the first trial which showed that cholesterol lowering could be good? Because these are all 5-6 trials, you should be very thorough when writing about a cholesterol story, because there are hundreds of articles, isn't it? What is the first trial which showed that cholesterol lowering could be good? Maybe most of you may not be knowing. It is called the Lipid Research Clinical LRC CPPT trial, which showed that cholesterol lowering could be good, but still it was not convincing. So most of the doctors in 1984, we were not using any cholesterol lowering drugs in the treatment of coronary artery disease. So any idea which is the first study which categorically showed that cholesterol lowering with statin improves survival? Any idea? Any guess? Often quoted paper, this landmark.
Jupiter, sir.
That is Jupiter is a very recent study. The first study, which study clearly categorically showed that cholesterol lowering with statin improves survival is the Forest study done by Terje Peterson, very, very landmark study in 1994. That is the first time doctors started using statins very happily for treating coronary artery disease. So that was the Forest studies. Now you brought in two important concepts. Which is the first study which said that acute MI, the first drug of choice should be statin?
Atorvastatin.
Which study should prove? No, it was actually the Prove It study in 2004, which shows that as soon as a patient has got a suspected chest pain, without looking at the lipid profile, go ahead and give statins, which improves survival. That was the Prove It study. And then lower the better was a concept that was brought in by 2005 treating to new target study. And then the statins in primary prevention, all of you mentioned it. The Plaul-Rutger study, very good, Jupiter. That was the Jupiter study in 2008. And then ezetimibe may be useful. What was the study?
Improve it.
Very good, improve it. And what is it which shows that lowest is the best? That's the most recent, PCSK9 inhibition by the Fourier study. So just note these important studies, keep it in your mind. It's a very useful slide for you. But then the topic we are discussing today is a little more different. Can we prevent the development of this atherosclerosis by restricting dietary cholesterol is the one which we are going to look at it. So that we should remember how all this started was with the star origin of the cholesterol saga. It actually started about 100 years back, when Rokitansky suggested that, they did an immunochemical analysis or histochemical analysis of these plaques and recognized that these plaques contain 20 to 25 times more cholesterol. And they said that, these porridge-like lesions, atherosclerosis, the porridge-like lesions of these blood vessels are rich in cholesterol. So cholesterol should be responsible for this disease. And in 1930, Ignatowski, a Russian scientist, fed rabbits on milk and egg, the nutritious food which we all give our children. He fed these rabbits on this and produced these lesions. So he was dismayed. And then the people said that rabbit is a small animal, but your baby is also a small animal, isn't it? Then people said that rabbit is purely a vegetarian animal, and we are omnivorous. There is a controversy on that, but then we can look at another basic science arguments, omnivorous or purely herbivorous, you can look into it. And then 1933, the feedback inhibition was shown. And then 1955, the LDL was identified, and Brown and Goldstein, on identifying the mechanism of inhibition, said that if you activate this inhibition, we can get this disease we can get cure of this disease. That is the Nobel Prize winning. Then he gave out an editorial, heart attacks, we can go on with the century if you really utilize this mechanism. But still all of us were not sure whether cholesterol-rich foods or junk foods, should we restrict dietary cholesterol, or should we advise keto diet to our patients, or should we start giving statins to children. So these are the major questions I will answer in the course of the next 20 or 30 slides. So in fact, I had the benefit of being taught by a very eminent biochemist, Dr. C.R. Soman, extremely good oratorial skills, and he introduced this molecule cholesterol to us in our biochemistry classes, and he discussed cholesterol as the most brilliantly engineered molecule in nature. It needed so many molecules in the linen spiral for its synthesis. It needed so many molecules for its synthesis. He argued that this synthesis could have happened only after the evolution of photosynthesis and Krebs cycle. So he argued every step of its synthesis. and then highly highlighted the importance of it to every cell membrane. Because of that, we are able to do the cell membrane actions. And he brought out the concept that if you consider DNA as the chemical basis of heredity, the steroids are the chemical essence for life. I am a male because of a testosterone. You are a lady because of the estrogens. You are able to become a mother because of the progesterones. Isn't it? So every step I am able to talk to you in a little different manner because I am stressed, and this stress is by the stress hormones, isn't it? So every aspect of this is highlighted by him, and he recognized or pointed out that the sterol for the animal kingdom is the cholesterol, which makes the life possible, whereas the sterol for the plant kingdom is ergosterol. So that is why any plant product, whether it is potato, whether it is coconut, you can clearly write cholesterol free because they don't contain cholesterol, because it's a unique molecule for the animal kingdom. And at that time there were 13 Nobel laureates, and with adding Goldstein and Broad, it became 15 Nobel laureates down the line on this single molecule. So you can imagine how important this molecule is. So when the Nobel lecture, Goldstein and Brown started saying that cholesterol is a Janus-phased molecule. Any of you know what do you mean by this Janus phase? All of you know it. When I tell you, know, okay, I knew it. Anybody know what is this Janus phase? Nikhil? Nikhil, you are gone out, isn't it? Who else is there?
Sir, no, sir, I'm there.
Janus, you all know January, isn't it? January is the first month.
Yeah, sir.
It looks backwards and looks forward, isn't it? So it has got two phases. So that is the origin of this Janus phase. It has got two phases, one looking back and looking forward. So similarly, cholesterol has got two phases. It is absolutely insoluble in water. That is why it forms an integral part of the cell membrane. But unfortunately, this insolubility makes it a toxic subject once it comes out of the cell membrane. Free cholesterol-induced cytotoxicity has to be removed by the macrophages, causes foam cells, necrosis, and other things. So cholesterol outside where it is not functional turns out to be harmful. So that is the important. It's a double-edged weapon. That is what he started his Nobel lecture saying that. And this therefore needs proteins for transport and reception. So it's very simple, looks very simple. Listen, you need proteins for transport and removal. So let us look into the cholesterol homeostasis in the body. A 70 kilogram man has got about 35 grams of cholesterol in his body. 90% is located in cell membrane. All cells in the body make cholesterol. And together they produce about 15 milligram per kilogram per day. That comes to about 1 gram per day. And this extra cholesterol is lost because we lose our epithelial cells in the intestine as well as over the skin. And small percentage is lost as biliary cholesterol and bile salts, and our human intestine is capable of trans-intestinal cholesterol excretion, that is called the TICE. So, but then to have these things happen, you need transfer protein and receptors. So the first transfer protein I'll introduce you is the apolipoprotein A, which takes the extra cholesterol synthesized in the cells, takes it to the liver, it binds to the liver cells and gives the cholesterol to the liver, and liver recognizes that, okay, I have received cholesterol. So it converts it into bile acids and cholesterol in the bile acids, and it is excreted to the intestine. But when it goes to the intestine is upset. It's a very important substance. I have spent so much energy to synthesize it. It's a good molecule. I need it. So it produced another receptor called the Niemann-Pick type protein IL-1, which allows it to be reabsorbed. This forms the enterohepatic recycling of cholesterol. So this cholesterol reabsorbed remains in the intestine. It needs to be transported, isn't it? That is where nature devised the new protein, the apolipoprotein B. This apolipoprotein, in addition to taking the cholesterol from the liver, takes a triglyceride that has been facilitated to absorption by the micelle formation by the bile salt. So the enterocytes are loaded with triglycerides and cholesterol. They form what are called the chylomicron. They are taken through the chyle and then it enters the circulation. This chyle leaves the various triglycerides to various adipose tissue as well as skeletal muscle and comes back to the liver as the remnant particle, and remnant particle is again attaches to LDL receptor because its protein essentially is the B48, apolipoprotein B48, and it loads the liver with whatever cholesterol and triglycerides left in it. And liver itself is another factory which synthesizes cholesterol and triglyceride. This again packs them all along with apolipoprotein B100 as the VLDL. And this VLDL circulates in the body as the IDL, giving the triglycerides to the various tissues. And then more triglyceride as you lose it, it becomes the LDL and comes back to be absorbed by the liver with the LDL receptor. So all of us thought that this is essentially does the forward cholesterol transport. What essentially it does is the forward triglyceride transport. So this is essentially the fundamental change in understanding of the LDL metabolism that has happened in the last decade is that we have recognized that LDL, which was considered as the moiety for the forward cholesterol transport, essentially does is the forward triglyceride transport. So I'll just argue for it better. They did lot of radioisotope level studies. They showed that the maximum number of LDL receptors are located in the adrenal, followed by the liver and the intestine. And they looked at the virus, and 90% of the LDL molecule that is removed is essentially at the liver. So 90% of circulation LDL has to be removed by the liver because a very large organ weighing about 1 to 1.3 kilograms contains so much of LDL receptors. It accounts for the maximal removal of the LDL from circulation. And essentially, rest of the LDL does is the forward triglyceride transport. So then they recognize what is the minimum LDL level needed to translate, to saturate all the LDL receptors in the body. It is only 12.5 milligram per deciliter. So a blood level more than 20 milligram of LDL is not needed for the normal physiological functions of LDL. So this is actually a basic science article which was very, very important. Therefore, when you are born, if you look at your umbilical cord, your HDL level is around 25 milligram per deciliter, whereas LDL level is only 40-45 milligram per deciliter. So that is a very, very important mistake. And as soon as you are born, from an enteral placental mediated circulation, the liver takes over to help you the enteral mediated feeding. The LDL level goes to 100 milligram per deciliter, and the liver starts synthesizing the cholesterol, triglyceride from whatever you eat. Your LDL level goes up, and the normal LDL HDL ratio is 2 in neutral life, becomes more than 2 because liver takes over the LDL synthesis. So the fundamental concepts of LDL biology are LDL level less than 20 milligram per deciliter is physiological, and an LDL level marks the enteral stage of nutrition at birth, and an LDL HDL ratio when it exceeds 3, 4 like that essentially shows that you are going for an intense enteral nutrition, what is more than what you needed. And LDL half-life decides your atherogenic lifespan. What does it mean? LDL half-life decides your atherogenic or vascular toxic lifespan. Essentially, this concept came in with the Endo-Akira coming out with the inhibition and a substance which can inhibit the HMG coenzyme, a reductase enzyme, the rate limiting step in the cholesterol biosynthesis. So he showed that this enzyme, once this enzyme is inhibited, the intracellular cholesterol level comes down inside the hepatocytes. As a result, it upgrades the LDL receptors, which absorb the LDL from circulation, cholesterol from the circulation, and normalizes the LDL, the cholesterol level inside the cell. So essentially, reducing the circulating LDL essentially means it lowers the LDL half-life. And then editorial by Goldstein and Brown in 1981 NEJM categorically showed that the statin has got 2 half-lives. One is the biochemical half-life, and secondly a biological half-life, where it decides the LDL. For example, if you take a statin today, your LDL lowering effect can last up to 3 to 5 days. So many of drugs this antibiotics has got a biological half-life as well as a biochemical or a pharmacological half-life. So this is the important thing which statins can have prolonged half-life. That is why we give this statins towards the evening, because this HMG coenzyme activity speaks towards the evening. That's time we advise people to take the statins. So if you take dietary cholesterol, up to 50% of the dietary cholesterol can be absorbed, and it goes in and inhibits the enzyme, but intracellular cholesterol level is adequate. It down-regulates the LDL receptors and prolongs the plasma LDL half-life. So now we are moving from the circulating LDL level to something more important, that is the circulating time of this LDL in circulation, what you call as the LDL half-life. So we have got studies from 160 countries, the cholesterol level is in cardiovascular mortality. And the early study was by Do you know who is this gentleman whose picture is shown now? The man behind the 7 country studies, any idea? Obviously, you people were not interested in preventive cardiology. He is one of the father figures in preventive cardiology, Hansel Keys, who did the 7 country studies and categorically showed that your blood cholesterol increases from 200 to more than 200 milligram per deciliter. Your cardiovascular risk can increase up to 14 times. But we have got now countries where blood cholesterol level is lower, but cardiovascular mortality is higher, essentially because we keep our blood pressure high. We consume cholesterol as oxidized cholesterol, we consume more trans fats, we have more inflammatory reactions and thrombotic issues in our circulation. So that now we know the data correlated to cholesterol level and the cardiovascular mortality. What is this oxidized cholesterol? You all know. When you go on heating cholesterol like butter you heat, it gets into ghee, which is actually oxidized cholesterol. That is the first thing which was shown that it is more atherogenic than the mere cholesterol itself. But unfortunately, ghee sweets are becoming more and more popular as of today. And the second important study in human beings which showed that blood pressure is harmful is a natural disease, what we call as the coarctation of aorta. You can see the narrowing of the aorta. The circulating blood has the same LDL level, isn't it? The aorta above the lesion, subject to high blood pressure, has got intense atherosclerosis, whereas beneath the lesion where the blood pressure is low, is almost clean. So this is extremely important. Why you have to tackle blood pressure? We have to tackle this atherosclerotic arterial disease. So now we know that there are 2 pools of cholesterol in the body, the physiological cellular pool, and the second pool is the cholesterol in transit, which is characterized by the good cholesterol, which is the HDL, which essentially facilitates excretion. And there is something called a bad cholesterol, which is mediated by LDL, which can facilitate deposition in the blood vessel, especially if you have got hypertension, if you have got stress, you have got blood levels, inflammation, and other reasons by which can get deposited. So any of you know the theories of atherogenesis? All of you deal with so much of atherosclerosis. What are the theories of atherogenesis? Anybody can discuss? Otherwise you'll all sleep off. Who are all there today? Let me see the names. Anybody can volunteer. Some theories of atherosclerosis.
Yes, sir. Sir, one is nitrous oxide theory, sir.
Very good. Nitric oxide oxidization. So I will just enumerate. The earliest theory was actually the thrombogenic theory, which brought forth by Virchow. Then there is a mechanical theory also where the bifurcations gets affected. Then there is a lipid theory by Rokitansky. Then response to injury hypothesis by Rose was very, very famous. Then came the monoclonal theory by Bendit. At least you should go and prepare a short notes on theory on atherosclerosis. Now the most accepted concept is the LDL retention hypothesis. Then there is a lipid oxidation hypothesis which says that if you oxidize cholesterol, it cannot be utilized for metabolism, it can only get deposited. Then there is an infectious theory also where chlamydia, Epstein-Barr virus, herpes, Helicobacter and HPV are all implicated because these are all essentially important if you want to prevent cardiovascular disease. Now how does this LDL half-life cause disease? That is the mechanistic evidence which I am going to show you. If your liver has got enough LDL receptors, it will remove the LDL from circulation. LDL half-life will be low. So only 10% of the cholesterol or LDL need to be reaching the tissues. The blood vessel will be clean. Your circulating ApoB level, which is a marker of the circulating LDL level, will be less than 80 milligram. Is that clear? So this is what is nature intended. Your circulating LDL ApoB level should be below 80. Your blood vessels will be clean. But suppose your liver for many reasons downregulates its receptors, what will happen? Your ApoB started going above 80 milligram, and even if the peripheral tissues are unable to remove, it will start getting deposited in the blood vessel as the plaque. So in addition, if both tissues and liver are unable to take this, your blood vessel disease becomes very intense, especially if you start using oxidized cholesterol, your blood pressure is high, you will be in deep trouble. That is how the mechanistic evidence is argued about. And the best example of this is you would have seen children with familial hyperlipidemia, isn't it? For LDL half-life is very much prolonged. Since this LDL cannot be absorbed by the liver produces so much of LDL, so that LDL level goes on increasing. So the feedback inhibition is lost, your LDL level goes on increasing. It's a classical example. So if you have got a normal LDL receptors in your hepatocytes, the blood cholesterol level will be around 150 milligram per deciliter. And you will develop disease by after the age of 65 years. This is the common natural history of atherosclerosis. But if you have got a heterozygous hyperlipidemia, you have got half the cells do not have the LDL receptor. So your LDL receptor number is reduced to half. So what happens? Your blood cholesterol level doubles. It becomes at least 300 milligram per deciliter. You start developing coronary artery disease below the age of 65 years, maybe 30 years or 40 years. Now suppose you have got the homozygous, there is no LDL receptors, your blood cholesterol level becomes 600 and 900 milligram. You start developing disease by 7 and 9 years. Can you see that? So this is essentially the excellent example how it is important. And if you analyze what causes this familial hyperlipidemia, about 1/3 of the causes is by the LDL receptor abnormality, and about 1/3 to 2/3 is by the apolipoprotein anomaly, and some are due to both of together. And there is rest of the disease is due to 2 or 3 other protein, the PCSK9, IDOL receptor, and the hepatic adapter protein abnormality. So this is what Helen Hobbs went and researched and came out with a method of treating, and this is prevalent in 1 in 250 population. So you see 250 people, one of them is likely to have this disease. So there is another set of people who has got certain diseases by which LDL cholesterol level is very low. They have got a hyperactivity of this PCSK9 receptors. As a result, your blood cholesterol level is already from birth is below 50 milligram per deciliter. Your chance of having stroke and heart disease is 8 times less. They are normalized when they are doctors and engineers. They constitute about 2% of the population because they give you survival benefit. And analyzing this gene, there are at least 6 genetic abnormalities which can help you have a low LDL cholesterol level with normal lifespan. Very interesting, isn't it? So the other side, which takes away, shortens your lifespan, it is present in 1 in 250. Here, since it prolongs your lifespan, it is present in 2 out of 100 population. That is what the Dallas Heart Study categorically showed. So seeing all these things, the European Society of Cardiology appointed a commission whether low density lipoprotein causes this atherosclerosis. And they summarized a substance because we like the what you call as a coast postulate. We utilize the Bradford-Hill approach when you look for a risk factor to say is the cause and effect of a disease. And they categorically showed that association is consistent, it is graded, there is a temporal association, and there is response to treatment and high specificity for this. So all the primary and secondary prevention study has now categorically showed that we can bring down the cholesterol level below 50 milligram or LDL cholesterol below 50 milligram, you can avoid atherosclerotic arterial disease. And presently by the PCSK9 Glasgow intravascular ultrasound shows that we can really reverse the atherosclerotic plaques if we can keep the LDL level below 50 milligram per deciliter. So we have clearly shown that LDL below 50 is achievable, it is well tolerated and could be optimal for cardiovascular health and longevity. So you should recognize that what is this LDL metabolism. LDL comes, binds the LDL receptor, it is internalized, metabolized, and the LDL receptor comes to the outside of the hepatocyte to receive the another LDL molecule. But it is not so simple. It needs the facilitation by another molecule called PCSK9. If PCSK9 is active, the internalized LDL as well as the LDL receptor gets metabolized, so that you don't have any more LDL receptor coming to the exterior of the cell. This is where the feedback inhibition and control of LDL receptor also happens. So if you have something which will inhibit this PCSK9, you can facilitate the increase in the LDL receptors after metabolism. That is essentially the loss of function of PCSK9. So PCSK9 loss of function will upgrade the LDL receptors, gain of function will downgrade the LDL receptors. So that is the important. That is why we came out with a PCSK9 monoclonal antibody, which will take away the circulating PCSK9 and upgrade the LDL receptor. So some short note is asked on PCSK9. You should be able to define what is PCSK9, how it acts, how it is important in the metabolism. So if you look at the animal kingdom etiologically, you can say there are animals whose LDL receptors are highly active. So they can eat any amount of cholesterol Take all the carnivorous animals, they can eat any amount of cholesterol. They won't become atherosclerotic. If you want to produce atherosclerotic lesions in a tiger or a lion, what you have to do is make them hypothyroid. Whereas there are animals who are highly susceptible to dietary cholesterol, like man, baboon, sheep. Whereas dog is actually in between. That is what happened when Endo Akira came out with statins. He first tried it on dogs. He went on increasing the dose. Nothing happened. Blood level does not decrease. So actually he gave that study. Unless somebody told him you are studying the wrong animal, study something else like a monkey. Otherwise you won't get the benefit. So it took another 6 years for him to say the discovery which he made is beneficial. It took another 6 years. He discovered it in 1973. Only in 1980 he can show that it reduces the LDL level. So the evidence we have in front of us are extremely important. The animal models like Watanabe rat as well as Watanabe heritable hyperlipidemic rabbit model, the human model in familial hyperlipidemia, the genetic disorders which increases LDL receptor activity, the primary and secondary prevention studies, as well as therapeutic trials in familial hyperlipidemia. The most recently published trial in NEJM is also highly indicative. The 20-year follow-up of statins in children with familial hyperlipidemia has categorically shown that not only lower is better, you achieve it earlier, the better it is. The chance of dying due to atherosclerosis is postponed because if you keep the LDL level lower. And as of today, FDA has approved statins for children above the age of 10 years, whereas the European Commission has improved it above the age of 6 years. And most of us who are practicing pediatric cardiologists, whenever we see a vasculitic like Kawasaki disease, or maybe rheumatoid arthritis, we are tempted to give statins to prevent the progression of atherosclerotic arterial disease, because we know that the lifetime exposure to low LDL and lower blood pressure makes a difference in lifetime risk for cardiovascular risk. Now the question is there any studies which shows that you reduce the public health, you ask people not to take butter, has it benefited? So this was you would have heard about the studies which happened in Finland. You can see that people were asked to avoid butter for breakfast. So this gentleman, Pekka Puska, did it when he did the earlier studies in Finland, and then it later spread over rest of the Finland. Whereas this happened in 1972, whereas in 1982, many of us, because of the dietary recommendations, started recommending bread, butter, eggs, milk, and biscuits in the hospital diet from the original porridge and dal diet which was being distributed in the various community hospitals in Kerala. So by this simple recommendation in Finland, you can see that the per capita, the number of people using butter along with bread in the breakfast came down from 92% to about less than 10% over the years. And similarly, the per capita use of butter came down from 18 kilogram per person per year to 2 kilogram per person per year. The blood cholesterol level dropped. The stroke and heart disease declined by 80%. From the North Karelia project to the Finnish project, you can see that they achieved an 80% reduction of cardiovascular morbidity and stroke morbidity by reducing butter from the diet. So in the same time, Kerala, which introduced butter into the population, you can see that the cardiovascular mortality in 1960s, Finland was the heart disease capital for the world with 490 people for 1 lakh. Now Kerala is the heart disease capital for India with 490 people for 1 lakh population. So if you look at United States also, over the last 40 years, they have categorically brought down the cardiovascular mortality, mainly because of two important public health interventions. One is avoidance of tobacco use and by declining use of cholesterol in population, in addition to the primary PCA, whatever drugs and other things that has come in. And about 20% of this benefit is attributed to the reduction in blood cholesterol level. And mind you, this translated into the coronary atherosclerosis in the young people in 1980s. The Korean War and Vietnam War victims, the young people who died in the soldiers who died in the war autopsy, they showed about 80% prevalence of atherosclerosis. And in the recent Iraq War, the people who died have only 8% prevalence of atherosclerosis. So their public intervention has definitely show an important benefit, arguing to the reason why all of you should take some interest in preventive cardiology, especially for the relatives and children of patients coming to you with coronary artery disease, and especially for your families. You look at the autopsy studies in India, it is quite disturbing. This is a recent study. It is exactly the coronary artery disease has taken the same story like rheumatic heart disease. Earlier, 1910 autopsy studies argued that rheumatic heart disease is an uncommon disease in Kerala. Then say that it happens. Then it says that it became rampant. Then say that it happens as a juvenile mitral sclerosis. Similarly, coronary artery disease is exactly like that. In 1950, the studies showed that the coronary atherosclerosis is an extremely uncommon disease in India. Then they recognize it is common. Now we think that it's rampant to the extent that it's malignant atherosclerosis that happens in youngsters in India. So let's look at the per capita. We know that the countries like India and Indonesia uses less sugar and less meat compared to foreign countries. If you look at the per capita egg consumption, it is 1/5 of what US people take. If you take the per capita meat consumption again, you can see that how different it is. 1/10 of what United States takes. But if you look at the milk consumption, you can see that this far exceeds rest of the world. This is also an important source of cholesterol, the dairy products. So people think that fish is protective. Some people argue that keto diet is good. One of the countries which consistently consume keto diet is the Maldives. The average consumption of fish a day comes to 500 grams per day. This is what I consider as contaminated non-vegetarian, because the fish, as soon as it is caught, it is put into salt and ice so as to be preserved. And they consume about 19 kilograms, 190 kilogram per person per year of fish. But unfortunately, you take their X-ray, you can see how the femoral artery is calcified. The high sodium content and the frying which they practice destroys all the healthy effects of fish. And fish, even though is considered to be protective, is no longer protective, as you can see the intense atherosclerosis in these people. So if you look at the real Randall cycle, both glucose and ketones evolved as the brain food. Can you name any animal which uses only ketone as the brain food? Any idea? Anybody who is interested in biochemistry or who has completed what is called MSc zoology or BSc zoology, who knows something more about metabolism?
Sir, humans only consume glucose and ketones.
If you really look at it, they're all ruminant animals. You know, the cow and all, they eat grass. That grass is kept in that they ruminate it. The cellulose is acted upon by bacteria. They release the ketone bodies. They survive by the ketone bodies. For them, the ketone body. But the problem with ketone bodies is ketone bodies are highly acidic. So you can only tolerate a blood level of 0.1 to 0.3 nanomoles liter. Beyond that, it will interfere with your pH and mechanism, and then the whole enzyme cellulose protein will get denatured. So ketone bodies can act as brain food. It can act as human brain food also. But the blood sugar gives you an advantage that it can have a blood level of 3 to 7 nanomoles per liter. So they do both give the same amount of calories, but you can have 10 times more energy from blood sugar without having any problem to the other proteins. Only some osmotic challenge will be there. So that is the advantage. That is how from the initial ketone body, which was the initial brain is the most metabolically active in the body, which needs continuous energy supply. Initially, the ketone body, provision of ketone body as the energy restricted its evolution as an intelligent brain. So once the glucose took over, the evolution of intelligent brain or the mammalian brain became very, very easy. It does not produce any pH challenge. It produces only minimal osmotic challenge, but then it started glycating protein. You know, the glycosylated hemoglobin are essentially increasing blood sugar level glycates proteins. So that is where if you have a mechanism by which you can avoid glycation also, you can tolerate a blood level of 260 milligram, which is what the birds tolerate. Birds' blood sugar is around 260. They have got specific enzymes which inhibit the glycation of protein. So this is the greatest advantage. So you can see that, you know, if you consider ketone as the diesel, you can sugar as a petrol, and it has become the aviation petrol for the birds. So if you look at that, so you can utilize ketogenic diet, but just be heavily under supervision, because it will cause so much of damage to your acid-base balance. It will provide so much of cholesterol to your body. You are actually producing an atherogenic environment. So I do not recommend ketogenic diet. So now the question is, can you reduce cholesterol from the childhood is the next question, because I showed you rabbits fed on milk and egg develops atherosclerosis. So your baby is small, so you cannot give 200 milligram. You cannot give a full egg today, but unfortunately we gave a double omelette to our children, isn't it? So that is where you have to come down. So there are at least 2-3 studies which categorically showed that if your blood cholesterol level is high, your development of atherosclerotic arterial studies is high, and there are at least 2-3 intervention studies, the strips as well as dietary intervention for lowering cholesterol in children categorically showed that our giving a cholesterol-less or a fat-less diet to children is safe. In fact, if you are weaning your child, keep the baby out of salt, sugar, and fat, or these are all essentially, whether it is salt, whether sugar or oil, they are industry-driven products which are sold only with the purpose of profit. Look at the animal kingdom, you can see that almost all carnivorous animals, the blood level of cholesterol is below 50 milligram per deciliter. Only man started increasing the blood cholesterol level by increasing our nutrition. All these animals produce cells produce the same level of cholesterol, 15 milligram per kilogram per day. It is the metabolism which decides your blood level. And this circulating level is the one which decides how atherogenic your circulation is. So we need to keep our LDL level below 70 milligram per deciliter if you want to avoid atherosclerosis. So now you know you have got a wonderful drug instead of daily statins. You can give a once a month injection of a PCSK9 antibody. Now Ray Kaushik has come out with a newer drug, the Inclisiran, which is the mRNA mediated inhibition of exchange coenzyme. Inclisiran can be given twice a year, almost like giving a vaccine. You take a flu vaccine every year, you take inclisiran injection once or twice a year, you can prevent atherosclerosis. So there are at least 3 scientists who categorically argue that we can eliminate the LDL receptor mediated diseases by having a healthy lifestyle from childhood. One is Helen Hobbs, second is Kim Williams, and 3 is Roger Davis. Let us see what all these people say. Helen Hobbs clearly says that if you are trying to reduce the blood cholesterol level, do it from childhood. The argument she says is very, very interesting. You look at the circulating blood, only 5% of it goes to the coronaries, but that is where the maximum damage due to atherosclerosis is, because in coronaries, during systole, there is no blood flow. The myocardium is the same pressure, aorta is there is no blood. Only in diastole, when the aortic pressure is diastolic blood pressure and the LV comes down to LV-DP, the myocardium can be perfect. That is why the ischemic heart disease commonly manifests in the coronaries, because their blood flow happens mainly in diastole. So that is this high systolic pressure aggravates the atherosclerosis. That is the vessel, or you see in the LDL, everything flows through the pulmonary circulation, there is no atherosclerosis. The coronaries are the maximum damage essentially because of the blood pressure. So if you want to prevent atherosclerosis from developing there, you keep the blood cholesterol level low from childhood itself. Now let us look at what is Kim Williams. He is the president of the American College of Cardiology. He categorically says there are only 2 types of health workers. One who has read this biochemistry and understood the mechanism. Others who have not understood. And actually he argues that if you understood this mechanism, you will be a vegan. You will not be eating cholesterol-containing food substances. The third person who categorically gave the classic lecture in 2000, George Lehman, who gave the Deaf Memorial Lecture, he argued that atherosclerosis is a liver disease of the heart. The liver which synthesizes the LDL, it is the liver which has removed the LDL. The liver which maintains the high LDL level and makes you more atherogenic. So he argues that myocardium is the longevity muscle. LDM is the longevity molecule. If you keep it level low, you will have a much longer life. And LDL receptor is the longevity receptor. So now you should recognize how bad your abdominal obesity is. So you can see that, when you are eating like eat like a glutton and sleep like a python, the only organ that is working is the intestine. The entire blood goes there and fills your omental circulation with fat. That is where it gets stored. But when the omental fat hydrolyzes, it directly goes to the liver and gets converted into LDL. So that is why you have your breakfast so that you are rest active in the day, your body gets better triglycerides, and share your lunch. And if forget your dinner and you're very particular to have it, give it to somebody whom you don't like. So it is extremely important not to deposit fat in your abdomen, because the abdominal fat directly goes to your liver and gets converted into LDL. So the common question which you all have, dietary cholesterol is better avoided. So in any substance which your body is not biochemically adapted is a junk food. The ideal LDL-HDL ratio should be around 2 to 3, and being physically active and consuming complex carbohydrates as cereals and pulses should be optimal. And as you know, keto diet may not be safe unless it is supervised. And the preventive cardiology should start from childhood itself as early as possible. And any food substance which is rich in salt, sugar, or fat, and cholesterol is a junk food. And presently, FSSAI has come out with the guidelines. It has given a junk food index for the commonly available food substances. They have categorically said they should not be sold in and around schools, and children should avoid this junk food. Because we need to start our prevention from as early as possible, because atherosclerosis is an age-related disease. As age advances, you are going to catch it. But unfortunately, people recognize that as you become more and more obese, you get into trouble. And the waist circumference became an important mark. But then in Indians, even before we become obese or we become abdominal obese, because we have low skeletal muscle, we get into trouble. So sarcopenia, the less skeletal muscle got recognized as an important factor in Indians. And worse is that the mother becoming diabetic, because the baby's pancreas will start working in utero and you get diabetes. So we need to reduce the speed of this watch. Take tobacco, every 7 seconds or 8 seconds somewhere else somebody dies of a tobacco related disease. Whereas you consider glucose, the clock is much more faster. Every 6 seconds somebody dies because of a glucose related disease, and 2 people become diabetic. So we need to act on it. And it is extremely important to prevent young mothers becoming diabetic, dyslipidemic, or obese. So living like rabbit is optimal and not optional. And thank you so much for the listening. Now I'm ready for the questions.
Sir, can you throw some light on the use of edible oils? Like they say that the mustard oil and the olive oil are the good oils because of PUFAs and MUFAs, while the other like palm oil and the coconut oil are the worst as far as the cardiovascular risk is concerned.
Okay, it's a good question. So that is where again we have to go to the basics. So what do you think, what is the difference between this polyunsaturated fats, monounsaturated fats and saturated fats? They have got double bonds, isn't it? And why polyunsaturated fatty acids became essential oil is the next question. Any idea?
No, sir.
Because your body cannot synthesize it. See, the omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids became important for your body. So why did this nature synthesize this omega-3, omega-6 as well as saturated fats is the next question. The omega-3 fats are, if you look at if you buy saturated fat in New Delhi or cold season, it comes as a cake, isn't it? If you buy coconut oil in New Delhi during cold season, it comes like a cake, isn't it? Isn't it? Anybody who has some experience in cooking will answer that. Agreed? Yeah, so it comes, because its melting point is around 18 to 20 degrees. Whereas if you take the omega-3, its melting point is minus 30 degrees. So when nature devised this cell membrane, it recognized that these cells cannot survive in the polar temperature of minus 30. So it needed a cell membrane made up of fat, which will sustain that temperature. That is how this omega-3 fatty acids evolved in nature. Then what happens is omega-3 fatty acids are highly susceptible to oxidation. When ultraviolet rays strikes, or if you just heat it, it gets oxidized and the double bond is lost, the plankton dies. So this plankton are eaten by fishes, and you consume fishes, you get this omega-3 fats. As you come to the temperate climate, nature recognizes that the longevity of the plankton can be increased by omega-6 fats. Agreed? So when it comes to tropical climates, nature recognizes that now the melting point is no longer an issue. you can develop the tropical oils, the palm oil and coconut oil, and palm and coconut lives for 100 of years. So everything was good. But when this animal kingdom started consuming this in the, what is it called, the food chain cycle, nature recognizes you don't have to synthesize this thing, you are getting from the enough from the circulation. But fortunately or unfortunately, as our cell membrane evolved, we needed a circulatory system which plants don't have. So when you develop a circulatory system, the omega-3 fatty acids evolved as a protective, less thrombogenic oils, whereas omega-6 fats evolved as the more thrombogenic oils. And saturated fats evolved as the atherogenic oils. So now we have categorical evidence both with coconut oil as well as palm oil that they are increase the LDL level, they increase the calorie intake, they are good not for your vessels. And in addition, we know that the omega-3 fatty acids are the most protective because they are less inflammatory, less thrombogenic or endothelial protective. So now the question is whether sunflower oil, they are rich in omega-6 fats, they may reduce the LDL, but they increase their inflammation as well as thrombogenicity. Can you get that point? So as such as we know, olive oil as well as which contains monosaturated fatty acid, they are not oils meant for heating or microwaving. They are oils meant only for seasoning. If these oils stay in your store, so for example, if you keep this oil in store, it becomes rancid. Because if it contains polyunsaturated fatty acid, it will become rancid because microorganisms are happy to grow in. So you have to put some preservatives, antioxidants in it. So that is how these polyunsaturated fatty acids are now coming to market. How they are refined, how they are preserved, there is no way you can find out. These are all what is called as the technical secrets. So all oils are produced in the nature or produced by technical people only with the intention of profit. And I don't have any scientific evidence to say that this oil is really best because of this. But if you are using oil for cooking, use it only for seasoning. And it is not best for cooking, reheating, or otherwise it will become more and more atherogenic. So it's a very complex answer, but this is the essential science or the basic science behind oils and fats.
Thanks.
So that is why any substance which is marketed with the intention of profit is bad for the heart. They will give some lot of advertisement gimmicks.
Yes. Sir, in one of the slides you showed that in London, it was found that Indian people have more chances of having atherosclerosis because of
oxidative fat.
Of ghee.
Yeah.
So can you explain little?
The cholesterol can be utilized for metabolism in the body, isn't it? Once you oxidize it, can no longer enter into these various cholesterol utilization cycles. So once it enters the LDL and gets deposited in the body, it can be removed only by the scavenger receptors and macrophages, and it aggravates atherosclerosis. So to transport them and to excrete them also, it is much more difficult than the basic cholesterol. So as such, oxidized cholesterol is more atherogenic than the cholesterol as such. And any cholesterol-rich foods you should avoid frying and deep heating to prevent the oxidation of cholesterol.
Okay, sir. Sir, it is said that in Indians, the cardiovascular disease occurs a decade earlier than the Western population, and it's because of the visceral fat.
Yeah.
So is it a genetic predisposition or a part of all the things which we see in our country or subcontinent where the cardiovascular disease and diabetic risk is so high?
No, genetic predisposition could be there because every region people evolve differently. So there could be a genetic disposition. But very important study in Kerala is that Indraheart study, which categorically showed that. What was the main message of Indraheart study? Any idea? By Salim Yusuf in 2004?
Majority of the cases of heart diseases are due to preventable risk factors.
Risk factors. So essentially it is the unhealthy. Yeah, 95% is due to environmental factors. It is the unhealthy urbanization which are done in a very short time, which has actually harmed our youngsters. rather than the real genetic factors. Even if you got a genetic factor, if you control the environmental factor, it is preventable. That is the major message in preventive cardiology as coming as us today. Even if you have familial hyperlipidemia, you keep your blood cholesterol LDL level below 70 from childhood, you can have a normal lifespan. What more do you want? So even if genetic predisposition is now tackleable, so it is unhealthy environment and lack of physical activity and more atmospheric pollution and use of tobacco which harms Indians. Then it is actually the rapid urbanization which has harmed Indians more than the genetic predisposition. So you can really argue on that. And the mechanism of abdominal obesity, if you go through that slide, there are two important references: the mechanisms and causes and consequences of abdominal obesity. See, if your circulation is common to the entire body, if you eat like a glutton and sleep like a python, the only place where blood goes is to the intestine. So you can only deposit omental fat. Unfortunately, omental fat, when it is lysed, goes to the liver where the LDL synthesis is maximum. Whereas if it is in the periphery, it goes through the various skeletal muscles and fat where the triglycerides will again be used up for energy. So that is the important. So preferably don't deposit omental fat, have the Gainard fat distribution. So omental fat is harmful, but why you deposit omental fat is the very heavy meals as well as the declining physical activity we have today. That is, if you have a good breakfast in the morning, you will be at least active throughout the day, and the circulation to the rest of the body is more than specifically going to the omentum, because every fat absorbed goes through the chyle into the systemic circulation. So that will help you more by chylomicrons by distributing the triglycerides to the tissues. So omental fat is more harmful, and the present dietary habits of Indians also is very harmful because we have a heavy dinner, isn't it?
So in between, there was one article which was published in the New York Times that cholesterol or not, you eat cholesterol or not, it doesn't matter. Like, there was a controversy regarding the consumption of eggs, and finally they said that it does not raise cholesterol.
So that is what I showed you. You eating eggs, how does it prevent your blood cholesterol from rising? That is the main theme of this today's discussion, was essentially bringing you down that controversy. And what over the last 1 hour I have been teaching you the mechanism. So if you have a cholesterol-rich food, how does it prevent your blood cholesterol from rising? Now tell me the mechanism. Actually, it gets converted into the chylomicrons in the intestine, goes to the liver, chylomicrons are taken up. It increases the intracellular cholesterol in the liver. As a result, it inhibits two things. It inhibits the HMG coenzyme as well as it inhibits the LDL receptors. So as such, it will not cause a further increase in cholesterol synthesis. HMG coenzyme is inhibited. But what it does is it downregulates the LDL receptors. As a result, your circulating LDL half-life is prolonged. So there is more LDL is available in circulation for deposition in the blood vessels. So the cholesterol you eat is not going to get deposited. The cholesterol you eat is going to inhibit the cholesterol synthesis. So the blood cholesterol doesn't matter. But what happens is that whatever LDL that is circulating remains in circulation for longer, which is harmful, and it perpetuates atherosclerosis. So the current understanding is that whatever you do, you should keep the circulating LDL receptor shorter. That is how the carnivorous animals who eat a lot of carnivorous cholesterol-rich food, they don't die of atherosclerosis because their blood cholesterol is always below 50. If you want to make them atherosclerosis, either make them hypothyroid or put a balloon in their blood vessels and denute the endothelium. That is how we create experimental atherosclerosis to study the effect of the various stents in the animal models. You take a pig, either you make it hypothyroid, you put a femoral artery, put a balloon and denute the endothelium. That is why I did when I did the Shahjahan's stent trial. That is how I did it. So essentially, just because you eating does not alter the cholesterol level doesn't mean anything, because inhibition of HMG coenzyme by dietary cholesterol is a complex mechanism Cholesterol is insoluble in water. It involves the transport by a protein, and it needs a receptor to find it. And because that the receptor is further down-regulated, the LDL half-life is prolonged, and that increases the atherogenicity. That is where the statins work. It reduces the intracellular cholesterol level. It upgrades, regulates the receptors. That is how it is effective in familial hyperlipidemia also. So that is how statins is likely to become a wonder drug in another 10 years, especially with the advent of PCS, understanding of PCSK9 and IDOL receptors. Statins are going to make a big comeback in this decade.
So then keto diet, it will not cause LDL cholesterol rise, sir. Then it will increase the LDL cholesterol.
The thing is that just because you are taking cholesterol, it will not increase the LDL cholesterol level. Only it will increase the LDL circulating half-life. That's what I have been telling you. Keto diet, you eat lot of butter, you eat lot of cholesterol-rich fat is in it, and you eat lot of saturated fat, which is further going to increase your LDL level. But the problem is that it is going to increase your LDL half-life, which we are not studying as of today. That is not acceptable. And especially if you are taking butter, you may even feel like heating it into ghee. Again, it is going to be oxidized cholesterol. And as such, ketonemia you are generating, it is going to be very, very tricky. It is going to be the line between life and death is going to be very short. There has been very few reports which say that sudden death is more common in people who are on keto diet. Essentially because ketonemia is a very, very tricky situation between acidosis and a normal level which you can make. So in fact today what I have done is taking your interest from the blood LDL level to the half-life of LDL. That is what I have done, which is more pathogenic and which is more important in prevention.
Sir, finally, which diet you will advise, sir?
There are at least three or four diets that anyway there is no question. I advise them to keep away from cholesterol. There are 2 or 3 diets. The Mediterranean diet, which is actually a way of life, and the Paul Elsine and all, they advocate a pure vegan diet. And as such, all these drinks which is rich in fruits, vegetables, green leafy vegetables, as well as half a plate should be full of fruits, vegetables and sprouted grains. And the rest of it, if whatever you like, you can take, but more important should be given to these type of food substances. Because essentially, both the 2 recently published studies, PREDIMED as well as the LIMIT trial, which categorically shows weight reduction is extremely important. And all these diets are beneficial. There are at least we have got now clear-cut randomized trial results. Both direct study as well as PREDIMED study you should go through. It is very, very useful to say a 15 kilogram reduction brings down both diabetes as well as hypertension without drugs. It's extremely important. And similarly, DASH diet for hypertension. And then we have got the lifestyle heart study by Dean Ornish. So at least there are 4 or 5 dietary patterns which is more towards the vegetarian side, which is the best for preventing and arresting atherosclerosis. That is what is being followed by almost all the lifestyle clinics.
Sir, there is one more diet which is doing the round, intermittent fasting, and there is one more diet which people tell that you have to eat between 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. So, what is your comment, sir, for those things?
I don't have any, the type A evidence by randomized studies on such diet. So the problem with intermittent fasting, we have during Hindus fast during various religious functions, the Christians fast during their Easter, and then Muslims fast during Ramadan. All these studies categorically show that post-fast they have a binge eating, which produces a lot of metabolic abnormalities. So there is no way you can control this binge eating as of today. So I do not advise any of these people to go for this intermittent fasting diet circle. What I advise is have your breakfast, share your lunch, and possible forget your dinner, and if you are very particular to have it, give it to somebody whom you don't like.
Okay, sir.
What about frequent multiple
snacking.
Meals
Hello.
rather than a single meal.
So that's actually more
Multiple and
metabolically.
small meals.
Yeah, that's actually metabolically looks much more metabolically appealing. But then you need a lot of control. What people take is that they take a vada or a samosa which contains about 300 to 400 calories, which contains a lot of trans fats, and they say I'm only occasionally eating. Similarly, people go and buy the biscuits. Anything that stays in the store for long, you have something wrong for the heart. Most of them are rich in trans fats, which are extremely harmful. So to advise snacking, how many of us snack only on fruits? Fresh fruits. How many of us are able to do that? Either it is not available. If it is available, it is unhygienic. Fruits and salads. So it is the most difficult thing unless you really practice it and show the way. Doctors practice it, because when I went to Guy's Hospital for my training in London, the pediatric cardiology department, only fruits and fruit juices are allowed. And only black coffee is allowed. No sugar, no milk. But how many departments can run like that? So snacking needs a phenomenal control, which is at present may not be possible. But if you are implemented, that seems to be more biologically adapted and metabolically less challenging to our system. So this is essentially the birthday cake my neighborhood children gave me, made of fruits and vegetables for my 55th birthday. So children understand it. You tell them, you don't cut the cake, they understand it and they follow it. That is why I put that picture. And this is the cake which now has come up in that last slide.
So final conclusion is oil doesn't matter what you eat, but unless you are eating right and exercising, that's the main thing, sir.
You have to eat right, you have to be exercising. Half the plate should be full of fruits, vegetables and sprouted grains. And anything rich in salt, sugar or oil should be avoided. Anything which is rich in salt, sugar, fat or cholesterol is a junk food. That was the definition which was given by Jacobson in 1972. But nobody bothered to understand what is a junk food. Anything which your biology is not adapted is to be a junk food. And unfortunately, industry has made all these things which challenge your biochemical system.
So oil, sir, which type of oil, whether it's groundnut, whether it's sesame or whatever it is, it doesn't matter, sir?
They are industry-driven products sold only with the intention of profit. And your biology is not adapted for oils. Because you take rice got 4% fat. That is why you are able to take rice bran oil is in it. So whatever oil you need is there in your natural food itself. How many animals fry any food substance? No animal does it, isn't it? And now I used to tell that all animals sleep prawn, only human beings sleep supine. And coronavirus has had to come and tell us prawn ventilation is better, isn't it? So we just refuse to look around.
Okay, sir. So oil really doesn't matter, sir. Unless you are eating right.
You should not reheat it. You should not reheat it. Use oil only for seasoning.
Okay, sir. Okay. Yes. I think, sir, we'll close the session. Any other doubts are there?
Put it on, because preventive cardiology is a huge topic. I take preventive cardiology for public health students for the last 20 years. It goes up to 4 hours to 4 days. It is actually, you have to show the trials, type A evidence, type B evidence. But today I just took you through the basic biochemistry or the basic fundamentals of cholesterol lowering and how PCSK9 inhibition has come out as the most important antibody of the decade. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you, sir. This will be our last. Yes, sir. This will be our last lecture, sir.
Yes, sir. All the best for your exams.
I think. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
And see you all in
many things from you, sir.
Yeah, and I would like to see you all in flying colors somewhere else in the world. And feel free to contact me at Siva Hot. And then kindly mention we met together in this, what is it called, this DNP session in 2020. Because by 2030, WHO has given us a mission that we should reduce diabetes, hypertension, heart disease at least by 1/3. So you have to practice it at home and practice it at your children. And maybe when I go for this Inspire classes for school students, I tell them after 10 years, you just send me a mail saying that how this class benefited you. So after 10 years, one of you should mail me how it changed your outlook and practice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. Sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. 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 Best wishes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.